We're going to make a start into this afternoon session because we've still got quite a lot of very interesting things to listen to. We want to keep time moving. My name's Mary Rogan. I'm from the School of Law in Trinity, and my main area of work is in prisons. But I've come to learn more about policing and have come to really respect the work of the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland through my chairing of a session in the offices of Dublin City Council last year, which was part of the consultation process in the development of the Commission's findings and recommendations. And at the heart of that session, that public consultation, was the theme of this afternoon's part of the proceedings. That's community policing, and it's clear that that's something which I think is at the heart of many of the recommendations made by the Commission and a lot of the discussion that I've been hearing throughout today. So the format of our session is going to be three wonderful speakers who are going to speak to us for about 20 minutes each, and I'll be keeping an eye on time. That'll then be followed by two responses of about 10 minutes each, and then hopefully we'll have as much time as we possibly can for Q&A. So we'll take all the papers and the responses together and then move into Q&A. We'll then, at the end of the session, move directly into the closing session. We're going to move directly into that, and there will be tea and coffee available after that as people are finishing the day's events. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker to you in this afternoon session, and that's Dr. Johnny Connolly from the University of Limerick. He's an Irish Research Council and Irish Council for Civil Liberties Research Fellow at the Centre for Crime, Justice and Victim Studies at the School of Law at the University of Limerick. His current research project is examining a comprehensive human rights-based response to drug and gang-related crime and community violence, among many other projects on community resilience and the impact of crime on communities. He's a former board member of the Irish Penal Reform Trust, as I know well, and a member of the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Johnny to you now. Thank you.
Now, I only have one slide to show you, and it relates to the first point I want to make, and that was around the decision to establish the Commission on the Future of Policing by the government in early 2017. Just prior to that announcement, I had written an article in the Irish Times where I said we don't need another commission, just implement the recommendations of the Inspectorate Report on changing policing in Ireland. Then I was very surprised I got a call from the Minister asking me to join the Commission, so I said yes. As Mark said, I have principles, and if you don't like them, I've got other ones. But it was Groucho Marx. Now, when I started working and when we started consulting, it became very clear to me that we really did need a Commission on the Future of Policing, similar to what had happened in the North, the Patent Commission. And one of the ways this is illustrated, if you look at the submissions that we received, over 300 submissions, the themes of those submissions, most of the submissions focused on the role of policing. You might have assumed that people would take it for granted about what the role of policing is, but clearly there was a great deal of concern around what was the precise role that we were expecting our police to form. And also, the way we looked at it is that policing is far more than just being about the police or in Garda Síochána, and that really informed our deliberations. In its seventh and final report of the process of implementation of the Modernisation and Renewal Programme, which followed on from the Inspectorate Report Changing Policing in Ireland, the Policing Authority stated just earlier this month that the absence of a strategic vision for the organisation in key areas has bedevilled the implementation of change. It says there is still no settled view articulated as to what the expanded Garda Síochána workforce will look like, how it will be recruited, trained, organised, and how best it can be effective for the community. There is a need for an agreed strategy on community policing, amongst other things. And Garda Síochána is proud of its tradition as a community policing service, And as the 2018 cultural audit showed us, Gardaí think of themselves as community police. This was also borne out by the Commission's own survey of 1,600 Garda members. There are many excellent Gardaí who know their communities well and who perform an exemplary service, but it is clear that the community policing system as a whole is under strain. Neither the structures of the police organisation nor its practices support the image it has of itself as a community policing service. Notwithstanding a great deal of rhetoric, in Ireland, as in many countries, community policing within our police organisation is marginalised and undervalued. We have extensive evidence of this, and yet the one constant theme running throughout most submissions to the Commission on the Future of Policing, particularly from Garda Síochána members, was the need for community policing to be central. It is also marginalised, I believe, politically, at a structural level, at a structural local level, and I'll come back to that point at the end. Community policing is a philosophy of policing that promotes community-based problem-solving strategies to address the underlying causes of crime and disorder and fear of crime, and which provides reassurance. Many community policing approaches involve the police performing a role in addressing community problems which may not directly relate to crime. Problem-solving policing reorientates the police away from the exclusive focus on the crime. Problems or harms, not crime, become the organising core of police activity. The concern is with preventing future harm. Similarly, solutions can be broader than simple law enforcement and involve the participation of other agencies such as housing or health agencies. Furthermore, the criminal law becomes only one means of addressing problems. Civil laws can also be utilised. Planning regulations, or increasingly mediation and restorative justice schemes, can have a part to play. Problem-solving policing requires analysis of the causes of the problem, identification of the options open to addressing it, and then the development of a means of evaluation of the impact on the problem so as to assess performance. Such an approach requires partnership between the police, the community, and other relevant agencies. Through partnership structures, communities seek involvement in decision-making and problem-solving. Community policing in this way involves community empowerment. It also has implications for the police in terms of structural change. To be effective, such an approach requires devolution of power within the police organisation and the decentralisation of police authority to patrol officers and a far greater emphasis on collaboration between police and community. The community policing approach emphasises ideas of consumer service, flexibility, consumer feedback and negotiation. Finally, this change in the police role necessitates training to enhance police understanding of the nature of community problems and for the development of problem-solving techniques. This was described in the Patton report as the need for more focus on developing personal communication and negotiation skills, scenario-based problem-solving exercises, self-assessment and peer assessment. Also, community policing approaches require a change in the way police effectiveness is measured. The number of arrests or prosecutions are crude measurements, and to fully assess community policing approaches requires more qualitative measurements, such as problem resolutions, but also community-oriented expectations and defined objectives. Throughout the world, there is a great variety in community policing models and approaches. Despite this variety, a number of common characteristics define the community policing approach. This has been referred to as the 9 Ps of community policing: philosophy, personalised, policing, patrols, permanent, place, proactive, partnership and problem solving. There is no single model of community policing, but the philosophy is strongly linked to the concepts of democracy and policing by consent, based on respect for fundamental human rights. It also requires the entire police force to adopt a broader concept of policing and a transformation of the mindset of all police officers. Many submissions received by the Commission highlighted broad public support from both outside and inside Garda Síochána for better community policing. At present, community policing is very informal and dependent on the personal commitment of local management to this form of policing and the level of support provided. Other criticisms made of community policing include that there is a considerable lack of supporting infrastructure for community policing units. The work and outcome of the work undertaken by community Gardaí is inappropriately measured, if at all. There is no clear command structure. The activities of community police or the community policing structures are not sufficiently formalised within the organisation. It is under-resourced. It does not have a proper career path or equality of status with respect to working conditions and allowances. Community policing personnel are moved to other policing units when the need arises, such as for sporting events or temporary transfer deals in response to pressure on policing resources. And this breaks down continuity in community policing service. The programme for recruiting suitable members to community policing is ill-conceived. Community police do not receive adequate training in conflict resolution, problem solving or communication skills. There is no specific office space to conduct meetings or receive telephone calls. The Commission has articulated a vision of policing into the future that puts community policing at its core. It has made radical proposals that will transform the way in which policing is delivered to local communities. In the report, we use the term district policing, which we consider to be the best fit for Irish circumstances and for the new model proposed. In the current approach, community policing is a kind of specialist activity, with perhaps 10% of Garda members in a district designated as community police. We regard district policing as the backbone of police work and the police mission. In our new district policing model, all police service personnel at district level should be considered to be community police, whether assigned to emergency response or community engagement. They should work as a single distinct policing team to solve problems affecting community safety, reduce crime and prevent harm. They should develop their own district policing plans, consulting with local community fora. They should be equipped to deliver all routine policing services with support from the divisional level for administration and certain specialist functions. The structure of Garda Síochána should reflect the focus on the front line by becoming flatter and less siloed. Headquarters should set policies, broad strategy, standards and objectives. Frontline police units should decide how they can best deliver those objectives and be accountable to their supervisors for the outcome. There must be a high degree of delegated authority, complemented by stronger local supervision, notably at sergeant and inspector level. Innovation, initiative and new approaches should be encouraged and evidence-based success applauded and disseminated. Excellence on the front line should be valued and recognised. The building of genuine community partnerships should be a requirement for all Garda districts. To be effective in preventing crime and protecting people from harm, police must work in partnership with other entities, including schools, community and volunteer organisations, businesses, human rights NGOs, youth groups, faith-based groups and others. We have seen evidence of good example of this around the country, but the practice should be universal and police leaders should be assessed in their success in building such partnerships. Gardaí should be assessed for their performance in this respect, and it should be a factor in determining assignments and promotions. Supporting the district will be the division level units. These should be large enough to be self-sufficient for all routine administrative and operational purposes. They should also have detective teams and other specialists to support the districts. Crisis intervention teams, including staff from mental health and child service agencies, should be based at divisional level. Each division should have an information centre supporting the district in data collection and analysis. In effect, the division should be, for most policing purposes, a mini police service in its own right. The current 28 divisions seem to us to be too many and too small. We were not prescriptive about the precise structure because we believe firmly that the Commissioner must be allowed to manage the organisation, and that includes deciding on the right structure. We do believe that it should be flatter than it is now, with a lower senior management rate. And the Garda Inspectorate has recently produced a report on local policing that is really a really important piece of work, which has gone into the detail of this a lot more. Joint policing committees and local community policing fora, it is also important that these should be effective fora for police to engage with communities at district level. In the new model for district policing, we envisage that district police leaders would develop local policing plans based on local objectives and priorities agreed with joint policing committees or local community policing fora, including full community participation. Currently, the Policing Authority has a responsibility to coordinate and support the JPCs. It has not had the same role in respect of local policing fora, but this is something that it is now looking at in its current strategy, which is extremely positive. We propose that the new oversight body, the Policing and Community Safety Oversight Commission, which will supersede the Policing Authority and Garda Inspectorate, should develop these local structures to function effectively, building capacity for participation by community stakeholders, setting standards for their operation and evaluating their performance. The key objective would be to build community trust and address problems through authentic engagement. PCSOC should also work with local fora to promote multi-agency approaches to community safety at the local level. It should have a fund available to support local innovations and initiatives. The public, police and politicians all told the Commission that they want to see more police on the front line. More police working in and with the community will help prevent and detect crime, reduce fear of crime and protect people at risk, both in urban and rural areas, of course. Many police are now doing jobs that do not require police powers and should be done by Garda staff or outsourced. Police also have unnecessary administrative duties such as keeping paper records, duplicating electronic ones, etc. And these should be stopped. These steps will allow significant numbers of Garda members to be redeployed to frontline district duties. The Commission heard repeatedly through our consultation that An Garda Síochána is constantly called upon to engage in non-crime roles, many of which could be conducted by other agencies. However, it has to be acknowledged that the professional police everywhere are often both the first port of call in that people go to them because they don't know where else to go and are then directed elsewhere, or they are the last port of call as there are no other sources locally available or accessible due to it being in the evening. The police are also unique in the extent of their extensive legal powers, which can be called upon at any time in the conduct of their general or specific roles, or when a non-crime issue becomes a crime issue. It is also very important to note that An Garda Síochána, like all professional police, have significant symbolic power in society. The key task for the Commission was to identify how this unique position can best be utilised for the benefit of those most dependent on it, which primarily are the most vulnerable in society. A January 2015 report by the UK College of Policing estimating demand on police service found that 80% of calls to the police were related to non-crime incidents, notably concerns over an individual's welfare. Theresa May, when she had an easier job as Home Secretary, told the UK Police Federation conference in May 2015 that police officers were not social workers, mental health nurses or paramedics. In reality, however, she got that wrong as well, I'm afraid. They often are all of these things, or they are at least on an amateur basis. And unless other professional bodies who perform these roles step up to the mark and become more engaged and accessible, An Garda Síochána will continue to perform such functions. In this respect, many Garda members display and perform an extremely admirable public service role, something that could be a lesson to many of us. Liam Herrick mentioned earlier the spirit of service and altruism, and what I would call not finishing at 5 p.m. if you're dealing with a serious situation. Most Gardaí I know wouldn't do so. The report of the Commission states that human rights are the foundation and purpose of policing, and we make a number of recommendations to ensure this is the case. Others have talked about this. I want to approach that from a different perspective. In all of the work I have done over the last 20 years at a community level in some of the most marginalised communities in the state, looking at local crime and policing issues, I have never once heard community activists or community members talking about their problems from a human rights perspective. I've never heard them use the language of human rights. I was recently looking at a book by the Yale academic legal historian Sam Moyne, called Not Enough, Human Rights in an Unequal World, where he was quite critical or really identified the challenge for the human rights community of delivering on human rights in such a fundamentally unfair global system. I think a similar issue could be raised at a local level in terms of crime and policing. It's very challenging from a human rights perspective to balance the rights of offenders with the rights of victims and with the rights of communities to be safe from fear and crime. But I think this is a challenge that we have to take on. It is about human rights from the ground up, being protected from the ground up. In many of the communities I have worked on recently, I finished a study in Dublin South Central, which is dealing with some really serious issues, and in association with the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, and we are looking at this idea of how do you articulate human rights from the ground up? How do you make them meaningful from the ground up? In this way, the Commission, we discussed this on the Commission, and it's something that we did take very seriously. We sought to make human rights mean something, and that they exist beyond just laws and treaties. Quoting from Andrew Chapman in a short book on human rights, in order to show that human rights are not just about competing claims and that they reflect the sense that human beings have special worth, we should turn to the increasingly influential idea that human rights are really about protecting human dignity, that agents and institutions are absolutely prohibited from degrading persons, treating them as if they had no rights or dignity, and drawing upon Jürgen Habermas, the idea of human rights is the conceptual hinge which connects the morality of equal respect for everyone with positive law and democratic lawmaking. And they anchor the idea of a just society in the institutions of constitutional states themselves. This is particularly important in terms of what we have said about the professionalisation of Garda members and the policing organisation. Because so many of the police powers are exercised out of sight. They have been referred to as street-level politicians. They are expected and they must bring discretion to a lot of their work. And so I think they should be the first, they should be the deliverers of human rights on the ground. That is the challenge. There is a historic challenge and opportunity facing us in terms of the future of policing. As we move to the centenary of the establishment of Garda Síochána, how to transform our policing model from the highly centralised and hierarchical colonial model we have inherited to a community policing model with all that the latter entails. The Commission has set down a transformative vision whereby the philosophy, principles and process that deliver policing with the community can be effectively delivered in an Irish context. When I saw Ursula Kilkay there, I remembered a meeting we had in Oberstown House where I asked a young man there if he would ever join the police force, and he laughed at me and he said that not in a million years would he or anybody he knew join Garda Síochána. That is also the challenge. We have to get to a place where marginalised individuals and communities are talking the language of human rights in a way that makes sense to them, and they see members of Garda Síochána as their champions and protectors. If we can get to that point, then we have been truly successful. The Garda Inspectorate reports of the Policing Authority and the direction it's going in, all of these are going to be very important in delivering on that. The importance of demand data, in knowing what the demands on the guards are. I'm concerned about the possibility, a real concern about the possibility of the marginalisation of community policing. That is the real challenge, that we don't allow that to happen. I'm concerned about the lack of political support for local structures in terms of resources and in other ways, and Marie and Mick are going to touch on that too. And this was a problem that came out that we could have addressed in the 2004 bill when the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice discussed community police, and I was an advisor to them at the time, but it's something that we failed to do, I believe, and joint policing committees have simply not fulfilled the potential that they could have done if we'd done it right. So it is really important that we get that political support from the top of the policing organisation to the bottom of the policing organisation. Gurmila Mahir. I should just say that I had an incentive to be finished in time because Donncha offered to buy me a drink later on if I kept it on time. So.
Well, I can confirm. I can confirm. Thanks very much, Johnny. Yeah, independently verified here by KPMG. Our next speaker is Marie Metcalfe, who's a community activist and coordinator of the Community Policing Forum since 1999. She has the key role of helping to improve communication between the community, the Gardaí and Dublin City Council. So Marie, we look forward to hearing from you.
Donegan, if I cut this short, do I get 2 points? Hello everybody, I'm going to give you a story. I'm not going to lecture to you. I don't like being lectured to, so I won't lecture to you. I find it, my own personal view, sitting in a situation like this, when people are speaking, I like to engage with the person. I kind of fall off asleep and I'm not engaging and I'm just listening. Sorry, but that's, I just have to speak the truth of where I come from. I am very, very nervous. I don't like doing public speaking. No matter how many times I do it, I hate it. So I'm really nervous. So please forgive me. I will try and hit the points that I feel you need to hear. So please go with me. And I will make it short, because if I get a drink out of this, why wouldn't I? Yeah. Okay, so as you are told, my name is Marie Metcalfe. I am the coordinator of the Community Policing Forum in the North East inner city. We had an epidemic of heroin crisis. It was absolutely horrendous what we were living in. And we didn't know what to do. And we were just looking at all these our community walking around being zombies. Like, we used to maybe people walking around being drunk, but not zombies. And we weren't really sure, you know. Never mind the Garda, we weren't sure what was going on. So we decided as a community activist and people that are involved in community activism all their lives, which I have been, decided to sit down and let's see what is going on here and what can we do and how do we do it. So we called the very, very first meeting just by word of mouth to let people know if anyone has an issue on the drug situation or involved or being affected by it, there's a local meeting going to happen on Thursday in the North Star Hotel. So that was the very, very first time a meeting ever came together to look at the drug issue in the North East inner city from a community level. 20 people turned up for that meeting. We were quite surprised, because usually people don't turn up to meetings, 5 or 10 or 6, 20, that was huge for us. And it was mainly mothers, some people, some men, some fathers, mainly mothers though. And it was horrific that evening. I'll never forget, it was one of the saddest meetings I was ever at. But yet it was like a space for people to be able to gel together and say, this is going on for me and not just next door. And to listen to these women and what they were suffering and the shame they felt, it was absolutely horrific. But then from that meeting you could see the support that happened with each other. Like the next door neighbour said, I didn't know you were going through that, I didn't know your son, I didn't know your daughter, or whatever. So they decided that it was a great evening to be able to sit there openly, express how they were feeling, the anger, the sadness, and some deaths had happened at that stage. So it was quite a difficult meeting. But we felt it was a space where people needed to go if they wanted to. So we asked would they like to come back, and they said yes. That continued for a couple of months. And as each meeting went on every Thursday, I have to tell you, it became thousands, not hundreds, thousands. They came from every part of Dublin because it was the only place it was actually being spoken about, the drug issue, openly. So then, from then on, all these marches that people might be aware of would have happened in the North East inner city. We felt very, very let down by the police. Sorry, on Garda Síochána. We were very, very let down. I didn't know anything about on Garda Síochána. I never had to interact with a police officer, so I wasn't really sure. But anyway, we went out there and we policed our own community. We didn't believe in the Gardaí anymore. We felt, or what we were seeing, truthfully, rightly, I'm not sure, what we were seeing was that the Gardaí seemed to be targeting addicts instead of the people that were selling the drugs. Because they were easy touch, you know, they're on your doorstep, they're in front of you. And they were the ones that looked to be causing the antisocial for the wider community. So we started to march and police our own communities, and it wasn't very, very nice, I have to tell you. It really wasn't. But I can say it cleaned up the North East inner city for 6 weeks when we policed it. It really did. Because you weren't allowed to come in or go out, and you were stopped by, you know, certain individuals that came together to look at this. And as time went on, as these marches and all this stuff that happened, one thing that did happen that we had to, why we stopped the marches was vigilante stepped in. And we all know when that happens, we're all in trouble, you know, the law becomes themselves. So there's a guy called, I'm not sure if people ever heard of him, Tony Gregory, my TD, and another guy called Fergus McCabe. Them two guys are my mentors. I met them when I was 12. I thought they were old men when I met them, but I can guarantee you I've caught up with them very, very quickly. So, yeah, but they were my mentors, and they were the main speakers of my community. So we sat down, and we have a group called Inner City Organisation Network, ICON, and we had a meeting with them, and we said, look, we need to change this. This has to change. The Gardaí have worked on their own. It doesn't seem to work. The Dublin City Council, they work on their own. That doesn't seem to work. We have tried to police our communities, and that didn't work. It did for a while, but then it doesn't really work, as we know. So what we do is we need to work together. And we went, oh my God, how is this going to happen in the northeast inner city, working with the Gardaí? Because our culture, you have to understand, we come from a very, very deprived area. And the culture, as I was growing up, you don't let the guards in. Because how we survived, this is only part of it, how we survived would be major shoplifters in our area, like, you know, come from all over the northeast inner city. And they go uptown and they get their stuff and they come back and they say, Marie, do you want to buy a pair of runners for £20? I'm going to say, no, it's okay. I'm going to go up to the shop and pay 100 for them. By God, they took the runners. And why wouldn't they? Wouldn't be able to survive unless they were able to. So that culture of keeping the Gardaí out, that was our culture. You don't let them in. We don't want to know. Because we're trying to survive this livelihood that we have. But as you know, the drug situation really messed everybody up. And so anyway, that's when we decided that we need to see, can we work together and how do we do it? So we put a proposal together to the Drugs Task Force on setting up a community policing forum in '99. The job was advertised. I didn't go for it. I just didn't go for it. But then the person didn't take the job, and then my community behind the scenes would say, Marie, why did you go for that job? I said, what would I do? How would I talk to the guards even? I don't know nothing about it. But they pushed me because they think I'm a waffler and I can kind of get people to kind of think a little bit twisting it around, like let's think of it this way for a change. So they know I was kind of good at that. So I went for the job, very honestly not expecting to get the job. So you know when you go into an interview, you're not really knowing you're not going to get this job, so you're very calm and relaxed. I got the job. And I went, oh shit, what have I got? Sorry. Oh God. What am I going to do and how am I going to do this? So anyway, my job then at that stage was to inform the local community of what we're going to try to do. And between myself and Connolly, Johnny was very much employed by my board of management to kind of assist me through the first 12 months of the CPF, you know, just to make sure I know what I'm doing. And he's quite good at what he does, I have to say. And my project was set up for 12 months only to see, can we connect together? And we're 20 years running, so we must have done something right. So we're still going. I have to say, I loved my job. I really did. I loved working with the Gardaí. I loved getting to know the system. I never thought I would know the ranks of Gardaí. Now, from community right to the commissioner, I'm so informed about the whole lot. So they really taught me well. And I do remember when I did take on the job, my daughter was going through a bad time at the time, and she wanted to go to mediums. They tell her how her life's going to be sorted. So I said, okay, I'll go with you. I don't believe in it, but I went for it to support her. So she made me sit and talk to the girl. And the girl said to me, I have the strangest thing about you. There's hundreds and hundreds of men around you. Really? I said, I've only got one good one. I could go out of my mind, hundreds of them. But that was it. And she said, they're minding you. And I did get a sense, yeah. And I've always had that sense. I was part of the family of the Garda Síochána, very proud to be part of that. It's been a quite difficult job, but it's fun and it's horrific. It can be sad, it can be all of those things together, but they have looked after me very, very well, and I do appreciate that from them. Okay, I'm just having a little couple of pointers here to remind me what I need to talk to you about. So, what am I doing on time? 5 minutes? Oh, okay. Okay, so my job at the end of the day was to sit down, have meetings with the community, with the Gardaí and with Dublin City Council. And every meeting I have, there was a sergeant at those meetings. Right, that was the structure that I would have put in place at the time. So I have to tell you, it was difficult. Sometimes you went in there and you had a little meeting about maintenance, because people in the community didn't even trust each other, never mind trust the guards. So we would have went through that, and so I would have to get DCC to make sure they fix somebody's maintenance. Then I would look good, and then they'd say, go to Marie, she'll get that sorted for you. So you kind of get people to come in, and you gel them in, and you grab them in, and you hold them in. So we would see that. There's another group I would meet, they're an elderly kind of group, and they would come down to me differently, in different directions, and they all live in the one complex, but they come down to me in different ways, because they don't want the community to see where they're going. You know, there's certain parts of the community that don't like what we do. But by the time they're finished talking to us and myself and the staff and the job, I bring them home in the car and drop them all into the complex at the one time. And I said, you know what you're doing? It doesn't matter, Marie. You have to give people confidence. You know, don't let your community intimidate you. We need to stand up, we need to stand together. And that's how we did it. And I learned my job would be about counselling. Maybe I should do some counselling professionally, so I'm doing and saying the right thing, but you can only do what you know, and you can only go through life and hopefully you're saying the right thing as you're going along, and that you're helping this person that needs help in some way. And I'm always hoping I do and say the right thing. The other thing would be, I would have been very involved in, is going up and seeing the PSNI up the north. And that blew my mind. It really blew me. Went up and they asked me would I like to take it up to the Falls Road, and I said, yeah, I wouldn't mind. And they put me into one of those big armoured cars. And at that stage, I hadn't been even in the police car. And I'm in the PSNI car. And it was absolutely horrific to drive around and see young kids just stoning the vans over. And I was like, oh my God. One little kid, I think he was 5, and he was like that to the van. And my colleague said, he just hasn't been trained yet to get to the right finger, you know, give him training. But the two police officers in the van, one was a Protestant and one was a Catholic. And it was amazing. I'm like, oh my God. And it was amazing, but it was so sad for me because their story was, their children didn't know what they did as a job. One was a fire officer, I'm not sure what the other guy was. But this relationship that these two young men had was brilliant, and you could see it. And you could see the change and, you know, this connection. But the sad thing was that their children couldn't be told what their dad did. And when I go up to the north, and I know how difficult we are up here, but when I go up to the north, I come back full of energy. It's like, yes, lads, come on, we can do anything here, because up there, oh, it's an awful place to be living at a local level of seeing this activity with communities and the police force up there. So we have great chances here, we have great opportunities to develop community policing. So that was one experience up there. The other one would have been, I would have asked to go up to the headquarters one day. I think I was about 4 or 5 years on the job. And at that time, I was kind of always asked to be included with what's happening. But this time I was asked to go up to the headquarters up in Phoenix Park, and this man stood up, and I'm inspector, blah, blah, and I believe you're the woman from the northeast inner city that knows everything. So I'm planning on this. There's a gang of European police officers coming over to Ireland to look at community policing. And because that's what you do, I think it's great that, you know, you should be involved in planning this. And let me planning it. So things started to change. All of a sudden, I'm asked to be involved in something, and now I'm being asked to plan it, you know. And I have to say, that was that guy sitting there. And he was a great police officer. But anyway, and I wish he wasn't in the room, because I would talk more about him if he wasn't. So that was the first time I've ever been told, you're part of this family. And I felt really good. When I felt down when the police officers did come over to Dublin, and we brought them around their area, and one police officer, I think he was French, and he said, Maria, is that your poorhouse? Oh shit. And I know, that's our school. And I was like, because I live there, I forget what I'm looking at. It's when you see other eyes come in and see your where you live, and they see it differently. And I was really saddened to hear that, you know. But now our babies are not in that school anymore. We got a brand new school, and they're in the new school now. But they actually thought that was their poorhouse. So you can imagine how devastated where I come from and what it's like to live in there. We also do fall meetings that happens in Store Street every 3 months. So I do local meetings all the time with the Garda, Dublin City Council, with the local people. But if I cannot get through an issue during those times, right? Every 3 months, as I say, then we go into Store Street and we meet with the chief, senior Garda right down, and Dublin City Council officials. And that's when the community will say, no, hold on a minute. We've been asked for this issue to be looked at. We've been speaking for about 6 weeks, 3 months, and it hasn't been moved and it hasn't got shifted. And it's great because, you know, the Gardaí will make sure that it works for them, because they're not going to sit there and be lambasted the next 3 months and say, you didn't do what we asked you to do. So there's accountability there, which is very, very good for the community. The other thing I would do is people come in and complain about the Gardaí. And my very first word I ever learned from the Gardaí was alleged. I never even said that word before. And everything now is alleged. But You know, and I really had to get that right, because you see, sometimes I say things, I say the wrong way, so if I'm saying anything wrong, please forgive me. But anyway, you know, people come in and they complain about maybe a raid that happened in their house. They don't know why the raid happened in their house. Sometimes the Garda are very social, which you can understand. They're going into maybe guns on the premise or something. But the mother never knows, and you all know, your children will only tell you what they think you need to know. So they come down and they say, Marie, can you find out why? And it would be great. I could make a call to whoever I need to and say, can you sit with this lady and explain what happened? And sometimes, you know, I want to get under the table after listening to what the Garda said. One time the mother was with me and she was so embarrassed. I felt so sorry for her because her child didn't tell her the truth of why the Garda were in there. You know, so I'm able to do that for my community, to set up meetings and to talk to people. And really what most people want is just to be acknowledged by the guards, you know, just to be acknowledged and to be heard and to be told. And I've only, very first time I ever heard anybody apologising to a community or a community group was this man here, Mick in Store Street one day. I went, oh my God, I've never heard a Gardaí apologise like that. But now, you know, it's changing and they say, if that happens, I am so sorry, that should have never happened. And then I heard a new commissioner, I'm dying to meet this man, see what he's like, and he apologised for the juvenile system. And I went, yes, we need to acknowledge when we're wrong, we're wrong. If we get it wrong, we get it wrong. We also have to understand that people don't always tell the truth, whether you're the Garda or the community. I remember someone coming in and telling me the Gardaí kicked her son around. Did she waffle? And I swallowed it. But the Gardaí are very good at me. They said, Marie, come here, I'm going to show you something. They showed me. I was devastated to think that somebody I knew very well deliberately lied to me. So it's a lesson, you know, you have that truth, you have that truth, but my job is to get to the truth in the middle and see where we go with that. It's a great job. It's something that has to happen, needs to happen. I would like, though, the Gardaí to not change so much. I have had 7 chiefs, you know, someone that has never worked again. 7 chiefs I've gone through, and I have to say, it's different every time, because everybody's different, the personalities are different. So then it's a job for me, like they have to get to know me, what's my agenda. I have no agenda, I never had. And it's trying to get them to trust me, that can I be trusted? Who am I? What am I? You know, and all I need is the Gardaí that I'm talking to and working with, especially a chief. I have no agenda. My agenda is that you and I, we need to work together, and let's try and see, can we make the quality of life for people in the north of the city much better. Am I time up? 1 minute, my time's up, and thank you very much for listening to me.
I'm not believing that stuff about the nerves earlier, absolutely not. Thank you very much, Marie, that was great. Our next speaker is Dr. Mick Feehan, who's been name-checked quite a bit already. He's a former Assistant Commissioner of Garda Síochána, retiring in 2012, following a successful career in a variety of roles in Garda Síochána, and more recently for the Dublin Airport Authority and in consultancy and training. He lectures on the MA in Criminal Justice at the Institute of Public Administration and also has a PhD in Governance from Queen's University, Belfast. Thank you very much.
Wouldn't you just love to have to follow Marie Metcalfe? Yeah. I'll do my best anyway. So, Donica, I think you're off the hook on all those drinks that you owe people, because I told Marie earlier that if she said anything nice about me, it was a drink every time. So look, I think she has enough. She has enough to go there. Just to introduce myself again, I worked as an assistant commissioner in the Dublin region, where I retired in 2012. Before that, I worked in the northern region along the border for a year. And before being assistant commissioner, I worked as the chief superintendent in Store Street, where I first really got to work closely with Marie and with the Community Policing Forum. Having retired from the Guards, I worked for nearly 4 years on the executive team in Dublin Airport Authority, where I reported to a guy called Kevin Toland, who was a very good friend of all the people in the Department of Justice. But even more importantly, I think in that job, for my own personal development, I think, I got to see effective performance management in operation, which I hadn't really seen within Garda Síochána. Johnny Connolly, in his introductory remarks, he talked about, when he heard that there was a new commission on the future of policing being set up, he said there was no need for that, and then he got a call and suddenly he was part of that. But his view was, well, if government acted on the recommendations which had been made by lots and lots of different bodies previous to the future, or the Commission on the Future of Policing, well, there might be no need for that commission. Lots of the things that I will reference, are on my own or from my own doctoral thesis. So they predate my retirement in 2012. So when I read lots of the recommendations from the Commission on the Future of Policing, I thought, these are things which have come up. Lots of them have come up before, and I might come back to that just in finishing. The Minister, in his remarks this morning, talked about, he's at meetings in Strasbourg, he's at meetings in Brussels and places, and regularly, whilst he's abroad, he is approached by people from different jurisdictions who ask him, well, how is it that the Irish Police Service achieves the high standard of metrics in terms of trust within communities, that the guards have achieved over the years? Well, I've certainly, as a practitioner of 35 years within the guards, I've seen that trust being built up. I've also seen that trust being damaged. So it's no surprise to me, that trust, or the metrics are at the level that they have been. And that's not to ignore the failings, which I'll certainly come back to during my presentation. In talking about community policing, and having been a practitioner in community policing, for many, many years, lots of the literature on community policing talks about community policing as the soft side of policing. I would have an absolutely contrarian view to that. I think as delivering effective community policing, I think is probably one of the most challenging things that any police man or woman will ever do. I'll talk to a couple of different themes during this 20-minute presentation. I've said already, some of them are findings from my own doctoral thesis, and I'll come to that very, very quickly. They're also from my own experience as a practitioner at various ranks within the guards, in working with communities. In the introduction, it was mentioned I also do some lecturing. So some of the themes, have been certainly informed by discussions in classrooms with people over the last 6 or 7 years. And certainly what I will say is also informed by working outside of Garda Síochána and having had the opportunity to look back into the organisation, which I really think is a great organisation, despite the many failings, that have been out in the public arena over several years. My doctorate in governance thesis title was Community Participation in the Development of Local Policing Policy and Practice, the Community Policing Forum Model of Engagement. And in writing that thesis and researching the thesis, I compared two broadly similar community policing initiatives, one of which was recognised as a success by lots of different metrics, and the other initiative, the other attempt, which actually failed dismally. And really what I was trying to find at the end of the day in my research was, well, why one succeeded and why the other one didn't. And some of the findings from the research was that, so these are some quotes from my own doctoral thesis. So even without any formal policy, local Garda managers in Forum 1 provided leadership in their engagement with the newly established forum, and that this leadership served to influence the approach adopted by Garda members throughout this Garda division. Little evidence of such leadership was found in the analysis of the data collected in the interviews conducted in Forum 2. And several speakers have talked about the need, and lots of the research talks about, so there are lots of initiatives, lots of policy documents out there, but they don't land at the front, right at the level that they need to, right at the front line in the organisation. And that finding, I think, certainly resonates with that. The community policing forum that failed was actually wound up, but in a statement circulated by the community representatives in that forum, at the closure of the forum, they stated that they could not continue to participate in a forum that has not delivered anything near basic civil rights in protecting us against the constant scourge of antisocial behaviour within our estate. think about that. This is an organisation that you work for, and that there's a whole swathe of people, community people, that you're working with to try and improve the service delivery delivered by the police organisation, and that people the whole community walk away from that initiative because it's not delivering anything near basic civil rights. Like, if you think about that, that should really have raised red flags within the Garda organisation. But because the measurement, and there wasn't real policy behind it, but certainly the metrics were not there. So that forum closed, and the fact that it closed, I think, probably maybe the attempt to set up the forum caused more damage in that community, because people were led to believe and were given expectations that this was something that was going to happen. And when it failed and the community walked away and the guards walked away in a different direction, I think that probably did a lot more damage than had if there were no initiative in the first place. Coming back to the findings, the Community Policing Forum has achieved success, at least in terms of public involvement and partnerships, and has enhanced the perceived legitimacy of Garda Síochána in the areas in which the fora were established. And that word legitimacy, and I'll come back to why would you want to engage with communities in the first place as a policing organisation. And Marie alluded to some of the background and the backdrop within the North Inner City and within Inner City Dublin back in the 80s, when the Community Policing Forum in the North East Inner City was established. And the very legitimacy of Garda Síochána was called into question in those communities. There were anti-drugs marches being organised by activists, people like Marie, and the guards were excluded from those meetings. And ultimately, people like Marie, and she mentioned Tony Gregory and Fergus McCabe, had the foresight and the courage to invite some of the guards into those meetings in the North Inner City. And from that courage and the push from the Community Policing Forum, which has now lasted for 20 years, and Marie talked about, meetings every couple of months in Store Street Garda Station, where you have 100 or more people, community people coming in there. That's gone on for 20 years. So that's a real, if you want an evidence of something succeeding. To me, people will not come in to listen to somebody waffling unless it's actually delivering. So I think that's, if you want evidence of something which works, I think that's the evidence. But the very legitimacy of Garda Síochána was being called into question in those communities because of the approach adopted by the guards in relation to some of the drugs activities around drugs marches and so forth. Another finding was that the commitment of Garda Síochána to the development of partnerships with communities has been espoused in various corporate strategies and policing plans. Again, if you look back at corporate strategy documents from Garda Síochána, when I was in the organisation, before that and since, and there's lots of talk, around empowerment and partnerships with communities. The problem, I think, is that these policy documents have been silent in relation to the finer details of the most appropriate vehicle through which such partnerships might be delivered. Another one of the findings was that a term, which was, I didn't coin it, but I had come across, called a term of structured informalism in the forum model has been a significant element in its success. And I think if I were to make a recommendation to the people who were charged with delivering on the findings of the Commission on the Future of Policing, I think structured informalism is something that I think should be really, really considered. That what's required, it is impossible to the right policy, in my opinion, to deal with every single thing that's going to come up, in a community, from a community engagement with the guards. But what you need is structures which are in place and which are measured, and I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes, but can actually deliver on the informalism, because you can't write policy for every line of every item. Some of the things I suppose that the Community Policing Forum supported during my period as Chief Superintendent in North Central Dublin, we actually delivered locally focused human rights training for guards as a result of some demands which were made from within the community. We were able to do that. We were able to establish a community policing forum for new communities. It started off as with the title of an ethnic community policing forum, but we were told very quickly that the term ethnic is a pejorative term and people from new communities didn't like that, but we actually set that up and it worked. I certainly believe that the Community Policing Forum in the North Inner City developed a level of trust in the guards on the part of the community, and that was achieved through honest dialogue. And all of those things were achieved in the absence of policy. So one of the recommendations that I made in my doctoral thesis was around the need for policy, which I'll come back to again in a couple of moments. So I was in breach of the recommendations of my own thesis, and it's probably appropriate to be in a school of law where I plead guilty to the charge if that's what's required. But there was no policy to underpin what we were trying to do there. There was no policy really to underpin the establishment of the community policing forum. In fact, the forum in the northeast inner city, I found in my research, was established in direct contravention of a direction from the Commissioner of the day. So that's interesting, I suppose, in its own right. Again, coming back to my findings, it was clear that the community policing forum model, if it were to be replicated in other areas, it must be underpinned by an unambiguous statement of its objectives, which have been agreed by all parties. So the commission, the oversight commission, you know, that was proposed in the Commission on the Future of Policing, can develop policy, but look at it, you certainly need to go and talk to communities, and I'm sure, I know I'm talking to people who are probably on the same sheet, but it must be an unambiguous statement of its objectives, which were agreed by all parties. Any such policies should encompass the notion of empowered deliberation and accountable autonomy. Again, nice flowery words, but there's a little bit of work to be done, I suppose, in teasing that out. They certainly must work within a clearly defined set of policies which set out the structures to be put in place. So what are the structures? And there's a bit of thinking to be done about this, in my mind. The structures to be put in place to deliver this within communities. And again, going back to the forum that I talked about which failed, so if you promise this, and look at trust was mentioned, I know, a couple of times during today's earlier sessions, if you promise this to people, you need to deliver it. So the structures that are to be put in place are really important, I think, and the level of accountability to which everybody, including and especially, I suppose, members of Garda Síochána, will be subjected through their involvement in the forum is absolutely key. And as I said, look at, these are findings which were in a doctoral thesis from around 2009. Many of them could have come from the Commission on the Future of Policing, which is certainly a lot later than 2009. So again, maybe it's a sense of déjà vu again. Going back to Donegal, so I should have said that having gone and talked to the people on the Commission on the Future of Policing, I was asked would I share a copy of my doctoral thesis with them. So I did that, and I reckon Donegal inviting me down here is just revenge for having to wade through a couple of hundred pages of this stuff. But there you go, Donegal. Just moving on to some of the broader issues, I suppose. So again, why should the Garda engage with communities? And again, just some quotes that I've come across. The community must have a voice in the forums that define community policing itself, must be a ready and knowledgeable ally to the forces of reform. So ready and knowledgeable. And if you want to understand what the policing service that is required around here, wherever around here is, you need to go and talk to the community. And in the neighbourhood where the benefits are supposed to be delivered, the community must have a serious part in implementing solutions as well as in nominating the problems. And that's not to say that you can offer an a la carte policing service to communities, but without like that structured informalism and the structures to have the dialogue, I think you're doomed in the first place. To me, real engagement can deliver structures, which I keep talking about, to foster dialogue. And as Marie talked about, it can certainly foster structures to deliver some accountability at the local level, can certainly deliver on legitimacy, and with a bit of work can actually deliver on trust. Johnny talked about the need for joint problem solving. You can certainly, achieve that. And again, at the bottom line, it can achieve the delivery or support the delivery of a better policing service. And again, I would say that lip service to engagement will serve to alienate communities and diminish the quality of the policing service. The word accountability has been used several times here today. And I think every one of us here acknowledge that is a requirement in policing for lots of reasons that we could talk about for a long time. But again, I would ask, what does that actually mean and how should it be delivered? And again, a quote I came across, that accountability can be a chameleon term. So it can mean really anything that you want it to mean. So if it means anything which you want it to mean, that can be positive or it can be negative. And Garda policy, as I've mentioned already, talked about partnerships, talks about empowerment of communities. But again, looking back over various reports, on Garda Síochána and the delivery of service. Again, when I was in the organisation, we were poor at measuring, concepts like empowerment and partnership, and I think that's really is a key issue. When public or police accountability in Ireland is discussed, it generally, the discussion is around appearance before the Public Accounts Committee, Justice and Equality Committee, Policing Authority, and other public bodies like that. And they're all part of, I suppose, what over recent years has been a new and necessary system of public accountability. I think everybody will probably accept that. But in that discourse, where is the accountability at the community level? And I would just ask, is that accountability to communities the poor relation when that accountability discourse is being out there at a strategic level? I think a key issue is around the difference between policy or informalism. And again, a quote from 2008, that various types of community policing schemes had in fact been in operation for several years and decades. And informalism helped ensure that any such initiatives that did emerge did so largely in an ad hoc fashion with little direction, coordination or evaluation of their impact. So I might go on promotion and transfer to an area in the country, and the person who was in the role before me could be really, really bought into community policing. I arrive and I think, well, maybe it's not so important here. So because there was no policy, and it was the structures were put in an informal manner, I didn't have to really focus that much, and I wasn't being measured, or my delivery wasn't been measured. Another quote on policy or informalism: it was found that collaboration between agencies occurred as a result of personal contacts, which are pretty important, and that in the future this should be pursued in a considered, systematic fashion rather than allowing it to happen haphazardly. So I guess the point there is that so many good things have happened, but they've happened in an informal manner without measurement, which I think is key. And in the absence of policy. And on performance management, again, a quote from the Commission on the Future of Policing: the building of genuine community partnerships should be a requirement of in all Garda districts. Gardaí should be assessed for their performance in this respect, and it should be a factor in determining assignments or promotion. And delivery, in my view, on that, again, it requires clarity on the structures to be put in place at the local level. It requires clearly stated policies, but with robust and measurable key performance indicators. And that measurement, and this is going to be a challenge, is a measurement of the buy-in at all levels within the Garda Síochána. I think somebody speaking earlier today talked about evidence-based policing, but a quote I came across from HMIC in 1998, that was one of the most concerning aspects of the information provided by many forces was the way in which success was interpreted. Based on their information, most of the initiatives described by them as successful did not achieve all or most of the initiative's objectives. Deja vu this week, if we look at some of the coverage of the report this week, in many cases a claim of success seemed to be based merely on the existence of the initiative rather than on what it actually had achieved. And I would say, okay, that's a quote from 1998, but I think it's certainly equally relevant today. A quote I came across from the 7th report to the Minister from the Policing Authority on implementing the Garda Inspectorate report changing policing in Ireland: verification of the progress made by the Garda Síochána needs to be independent, I think so, intrusive and persistent. And I know some of my colleagues from the Guards are absolutely bought into this who are here, but that is a real challenge, for any organisation to have that independent, intrusive and persistent monitoring. It is critical that any evaluation undertaken moves beyond monitoring the achievement of project milestones to actually evidencing and assessing the outputs and outcomes of activity. It has been the authority's experience that this is crucial in order to assess whether the intent and benefits of any recommendations are being realised, and to understand the impact of change, the change effort is actually having on the policing service offered to the community. And look, that service to the community is really where it's at. On the proposed Policing and Community Safety Oversight Commission and the functions, they talk about independent scrutiny of policing performance, fostering and monitoring interagency cooperation. But one of the interesting ones to me was carrying out inspections or inquiries concerning the delivery of policing services, and here's the thing, advising on and monitoring the implementation of recommendations arising from such inspections. And I would just pose the question, if the Commission and that oversight function is about advising on recommendations, where's the teeth? Does it have the power to actually make these things happen? In terms of community policing, in conclusion, I said I'd be up to 7 o'clock, yeah? In terms of community policing, I really do see the Community Safety Oversight Commission as a key driver of success. Just in conclusion, I think, and I don't think I know, there are many examples of good practice in community policing in Ireland, but many of these came about through informality, with no policy, no oversight, and very little measurement. You know, my view, I see policing is at a real crossroads again, and when the Garda Síochána Act in 2005 was being discussed, at the time people talked about a crossroads then, but I think it is at a real crossroads now. I don't think I know that there was a huge responsibility on those charged with mapping out that future and its delivery. And that responsibility is to communities, because communities across Ireland, and particularly in disadvantaged areas, are waiting for you to deliver. So there's a serious responsibility to everybody involved. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mick, and I'm sorry to have been pressurising you on time when you come to talk about implementation, because it's a subject very close to my heart, and we look with a little bit of envy on the penal policy side when we see the great activity and energy that's going in on the implementation of the Commission's report, and we hope that continues. We're going to move now into our responses, and there'll be 2 of those before we move into broader discussion. And our first response is going to come from Dr. Sindy Joyce, who's a human rights defender and who's been recently appointed as a member of the Council of State by President Michael D. Higgins, and we all send our very warm congratulations to you on that really wonderful achievement. Dr. Joyce lectures at the School of Social Policy, Social Work and Social Justice at UCD, researching racism, ethnicity, identity and social and political constructions of Irish travellers and space-related inequalities. She recently completed a very successful and highly regarded and indeed path-breaking PhD, which was funded by the Irish Research Council. It was path-breaking both in its content and also in the embodiment of the person of Dr. Joyce herself. And it's a great pleasure now to hear from Dr. Joyce, who's going to respond to what we've heard already. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. I suppose first of all I just want to say thank you to Danica for having me here today, and thank you for the speakers. You were all very interesting. And I suppose just to kind of give you a little bit more kind of introduction about myself. So I'm Dr. Sindy Joyce, and as we said, that I also come from the Minker community, which is the traveller community. The word Minker I use instead of traveller community because the word Minker is our own language, it's who we are. And for me, traveller community doesn't represent who I am or who my community is. And I suppose also these kind of terms like membership of the travelling community, it's as if it's a membership that you need to sign up to or something like that, and not an actual ethnic indigenous distinct identity within the island of Ireland. So I suppose for me, when I was doing my thesis, I suppose the title of my thesis was an ethnographic research of young travellers' experiences of racism in an Irish city. And I used Galway City as my case study. And I suppose one of the reasons why I used Galway was because I was living in Galway at the time working with the GTM, the Galway Traveller Movement, but also the fact that there was a big population of travellers within the city and the city outskirts here itself, and the second highest after Dublin. And also, I suppose for the main, reason that I pinpointed Galway City was because it was the first city in Ireland in 2008 to declare itself as an intercultural city. And I suppose the diversity of the city as well, it was just a perfect case study for me to use to see what the experiences of the young people were within the city of Galway itself. So my age group was looking at ages 14 to 21. And I suppose when I started off with my thesis, I had no idea that so much information, I suppose, and so much discussions was around policing and on Garda Síochána. So this was something new for me. It wasn't something that I was expecting at the beginning of going out doing my fieldwork and do my thesis. But it ended up that a section on policing had to get its whole individual section of itself because it was so much that came out of the discussions. So I suppose if we look at how on Garda Síochána, and lots of people have mentioned it all this morning, how it's like lots of people have mentioned it this morning, but also lots of sociologists and lots of scholars have also commented on the fact that on Garda Síochána has established itself in this country, on the island of Ireland, as one of the striking successes of the new state when they were founded in 1922. So we can see that on Garda Síochána would be seen as one of the in-groups in Irish society, so one of the groups that would be seen as a success. And also it would be, I suppose a lot of scholars has also said that it would be difficult to exaggerate the level of trust that the ordinary citizens of Ireland have for on Garda Síochána. And I suppose for me, after my research, a lot of my evidence came up that it was so different for my people, for my community, for Minker community. When we look at the relationship between on Garda Síochána and my people, we can see that from the foundation of the state, there has been amnesty between the two groups. And I suppose one of the reasons for that is because of on Garda Síochána's role in the evictions of us as a community. So evictions going back to the foundation of the state, on Garda Síochána being involved in that. So like we can see there where the sociologist Zoe James, she talks about how travellers are never seen as victims by on Garda Síochána, but are seen as suspects, continuously as suspects. And I suppose we can see that on Garda Síochána's own public attitude surveys and their inspectorate reports, they all say that the worst relationship that they have with any group in Irish society would be Minker community. And we can see that throughout so many different issues that we're facing in Irish society, for us as a community and also for on Garda Síochána. We can see that, for example, Amnesty International did a survey in 2001, and it stated their evidence found that for my people, for Minker community, that the racism that's experienced by from on Garda Síochána by us, that 4 out of 5 incidents are at the hands of on Garda Síochána. So when we can see that this is happening within our society for us, we can see that there's a total different contrast in the level of trust that we see in general in society. And I suppose just to go back into my own research, and I think Johnny mentioned a few minutes ago that on Garda Síochána would be seen as a symbolic power in society. And I suppose for us as a community, they would be seen as a symbolic power, but not in a positive way. It would be in a negative way, and it's that symbolic power of the long arm of the state having a clutch on you as a community, having you criminalised as a community, having you been considered as a suspect community. So we can see that happening through evictions, through I suppose, stops and searches. Within my research, the amount of evidence that came up of young people being stopped and searched and being brought to the stations and being arrested without any charges was just, it was on an everyday basis. And we can see that For the young people in my study, we can see that from infants, they're experiencing negativity, hostility, discrimination and racism at the hands of the Gardaí. Some of my participants talked about how they would be in bed at night, on a halting site, in their caravan, asleep. Could be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when a Garda car would come into the halting site with the sirens just going on, and somebody would wake up the whole park, and somebody would ask them, why are they here? And most of the time, the answer would be, because we can be. There was absolutely no reason for them to be there. There was no reason for them and they would just sit in the car, and they would sit in the car for 20 minutes with the light going on, and then drive away for absolutely no reason. So harassing the community. And then for the children have to get up in the morning to go to school after being disturbed the night before. Anything that's happening within my community, for example, events, funerals even. We have on Garda Síochána armed responses standing around. When you have armed responses continuously, you're being policed as a community. You're being watched continuously. You're a suspect continuously. And the intimidation of that, not only for the adults, but for the young children, and the psychological effect that that has. And we can see how that feeds into the mental issues that we have within our community. Suicide is 7 times higher than the general population. And if we look back into history, during the 1960s and the 1970s, mental health issues was really rare within my community. Not many people suffered from mental health issues. And now we have one of the worst rates of suicide in the world. In Australia, the Indigenous people, Aboriginals in Australia, talk about that they have one of the highest rates of suicide in the world. Their suicide rate is 6 times higher than the general population. And we, in a small country like Ireland, surpass that at 7 times higher. So that just shows where we are as a society. Sometimes we can look at ourselves and give ourselves a pat on the back and say we're doing great as a society. And we're doing lots of progressive things in society. But there's always the gap where we as a community have been either neglected or just left in the corner. And that has happened from the foundation of the state, from the beginning of the state, and it continues to happen with all legislation going through, all policies going through, and I suppose just the general attitude of Irish society in itself. And I suppose because of the embedded and the ingrained and the acceptance of anti-traveller racism in Irish society itself, it's no surprises that we have discrimination and racism coming from Garda Síochána. You know, it's just something that seems to be tolerable and acceptable in Irish society. You have people up there and you have people talking about human rights issues. You have people talking about other groups that it's not right to be racist and discrimination against anybody. But yet some of those same people will stand there and be racist and discriminative towards my community because it's acceptable. And the Council of Europe talks about how it's one of the last acceptable racisms in Europe is towards the traveller community and the Roma community. And it is, and we can see that. And we can see just there at lunchtime, I was just open my social media, Twitter, and it's an everyday thing, you know, you see something new from all over, not only in Ireland, but in Europe. This was in the UK, a Tory MP this morning, called travellers with a distinct Irish accent, he said, a disease that needs to be cleaned up, and is calling for the police in the UK to have more powers to evict travellers from the land. And they're quoting to use the Irish system, because the Irish system has been so successful in taking us, evicting us from lands, being discriminative towards us, and I suppose making us a separate, marginalised community in Irish society, and making us a suspect community in Irish society. And not only a suspect community to Garda Síochána, but when you're treated like that as a suspect community by Garda Síochána, it also drips down into ordinary people, everyday people. We're talking about business owners, we're talking about shops, restaurants, hotels. For us as a community, when I was doing my research, I was expecting to hear stories and discussions on racism, discrimination. And I suppose I was expecting it because I had experienced it myself, I had seen it myself, and there was many times that I myself had seen my parents, my cousins, friends, family, and my community experiencing racism. But I was actually shocked of the amount of racism and discrimination that these young people were experiencing, especially from Garda Síochána here in Galway. Some of my participants talked about how they would be stopped and searched continuously. They talked about how there would be Garda cars and Garda vans just parked alongside near halting sites for no reason, just watching them. They talked about having cameras being put on halting sites, cameras going right into their caravan window, so invading their privacy. One of my 14-year-old participants, 14 years old, talked about the surveillance by Garda Síochána. And they used the words concentration camp, open prison, a place of detention. And these spaces are considered in the sedentarized perception that this is culturally appropriate accommodation. So being detained in halting sites and being surveilled continuously like that, it's not culturally appropriate accommodation. It's the view of the settled community of what culturally appropriate accommodation should look like, where we can be surveillanced and suspected continuously. So I'm just going to finish up here and just give you just a little bit here about just in the last few years on Garda Síochána, just to kind of give a positive note on it. And Garda Síochána has tried to come up with a lot of initiatives around diversity, ethnic diversity, and about bringing more kind of, I suppose, more respect into their communities, and to also break down the barriers between the trust between Garda Síochána and the communities itself. I suppose one of the important things in my thesis was that some of my participants talked about, and they made a distinction between the ordinary Garda on the street and a community police officer that would come to traveller events, for example. And they had so many nice things to say about the community police guards that had actually undergone diversity and ethnic training. And some of the young people talked about how that they can actually speak to them. And perhaps what I found, I suppose, really eye-opening was the fact that some of the two boys, they were 16 years old, two boys, talked about, and they were laughing about it, and they said, you can actually have a joke with them. And they were kind of shocked that you could actually have a joke with them. So on a human level, they could interact with our members of Síochána. But they made that distinction, that it's the community guard that would be around. But it was not only an ordinary community guard, it was a community guard that made the effort of actually going to different events that were organised by the traveller community. So going to traveller pride events, for example, going to events that are positive and talking to the community on a basic level without the community feeling that they're criminals, that they're being suspected of something, without question, without being interrogated, continuously being interrogated. So I suppose for me, I suppose the good thing for me about this commission is that hopefully that the recommendations will not be left on a shelf like many recommendations in all different areas, that hopefully that these will be implemented and that there can be change within society. But I suppose one of the things that needs to be changed, I suppose, if we look at even the hate crime situation in Ireland, we have no hate crime legislation. We're falling behind. We are out of depth in Ireland when it comes to legislation. We have no hate crime legislation whatsoever. And if we look at how my community is suspected, just to give you an idea, an 18 days old baby put on the pulse system as a potential criminal. So already 18 days old, already on the system as a potential criminal. So the details are already on the system. So imagine when that child turns 14 and 15 and has a run-in with Garda Síochána, they're already in the system as potential criminals. So we can see how the community is suspected. So that relationship needs to be broken down, and there needs to be engagement there with Garda Síochána, my community. Thank you.
Very much indeed, Dr. Joyce. I think we all needed to hear a lot more of the material that you presented with us and shared with us. Thank you. Our final respondent is Dr. John Topping, who's a criminologist at Queen's University Belfast, specialising in policing, and he's engaged in many research and consultancy roles with, amongst others, the PSNI and the NIPB, and he's also the chairperson of Community Restorative Justice Ireland. Dr. Topping, thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, I have the dubious task of trying to follow on from what's been a fascinating panel. Thanks to Donica for inviting me down from Belfast today. I think this has been an eye-opening panel. We've had views from the outside of a former commissioner. We've had views from the inside. We've had views from, I think most importantly today, from the community, and it's great to see. I suppose really I feel like a bit of an interloper today. I'm, I suppose, here in my capacity of, I suppose, having worked with the police, PSNI, and the various policing institutions for over 12 years now. So I'm sort of fortunate to have seen many sides of the policing coin, sometimes as friend, probably more often foe with the policing institutions, but anyway, the lot of being an academic. And I suppose to just try and respond to some of the issues today, and particularly one thing which is clear to me, looking at the Commission report, some of the parallels with what we have seen with the Patent Commission, and almost every single page, and I mean that genuinely, almost every single page of the Commission's report, there are linkages and references to this idea of policing with the community, or community policing, or district policing in the language of the Commission's report. And I think it's absolutely vital that we see that. Not that community policing is this thing which is done by the police. Actually, in the context of what we're seeing here, seeing community policing actually more as, I would suggest, a journey, okay? Because certainly, whether we're looking at the situation of the difficult circumstances and the challenges of policing in Northern Ireland, or indeed some of the difficult circumstances, the various crises from which Garda Síochána are trying to move from. I think, you know, community policing, this idea of community policing, but also, as I come on to say, intertwined with human rights culture, is absolutely vital in what I would say reconnecting the police with the communities. And also, I think, a very telling, always a nice phrase I like to borrow from David Bailey, one of the old Patent Oversight Commissioners, giving policing back to the people. I think, as we've heard today, getting back to that spirit of what the Guards are really about in that historical sense. And I think human rights and community policing are particularly important, being intertwined, because they are fundamental to building relations with communities. Policing should not be done to communities. It has to be done with communities, otherwise it does not work. If we do not have, as we have learned with the PSNI, if we do not have the framework of human rights, that policing is proportionate, legitimate, appropriate and necessary, how on earth can you convince communities that you're doing policing in their interest? And similarly, if community policing is not there, how on earth do you build those relationships and build trust in the first place? So I think absolutely vital. And I suppose today, I mean, this is not an exercise in you know, giving lessons, but I suppose I will try to give some, or I suppose more some observations. And I think one of the most important lessons for police reform, particularly from Northern Ireland, is that it takes a lot of time. Okay, I appreciate the policing system here has gone right, from Morris and beyond. It's taken a long time for this feeling of change to come, which I think the winds of change have finally really come through the Commission. But if you look to Northern Ireland, it's taken, Patton will remarkably be 20 years old this September. It's taken 20 years for Patton and this idea of policing with the community. Patton Recommendation 44 to bed down, and we still haven't got it right. And I think the big lesson from that is that police and communities in a period of reform and change and conflict, they move at different speeds, and different communities themselves, even within that, will move at different speeds to the police. So I think patience is important, and I think to avoid that horrible police phrase, quick wins, there needs to be time taken and invested in this. This is a long-term project to get it right, because if you rush it, it doesn't tend to work. Certainly one of the big lessons I think we have seen. And I suppose the other question, the hanging issue, what does community policing actually look like, or what should it look like? Now, I'm not going to talk about, Johnny's talked and knows a lot more about policing models from around the world, and you can probably fill this lecture theatre with books and journal articles about what community policing is. I want to turn to what one of the fundamental, and I would say one of the crucial missing issues for policing in Northern Ireland, and that is of community education. One of the big parts of Patton that was missing, we never really told the community what community policing was actually about. So I would suggest, and strongly suggest, a vigorous campaign of working with communities, telling them what you're trying to achieve as a commission, and also telling them what you're trying to aspire to, not getting lost and bogged down in the system of glossy brochures and policy documents. It has to mean something to people, I think, particularly, as we've heard today, people on the ground. Okay, I think that's certainly one lesson. I suppose as part of that, education, it's also about telling communities and giving them realistic expectations as well. I don't quite know what the sort of Irish version of Dixon of Dock Green looks like, but communities will always hark back to more officers in the street, lower crime, back to some golden era which may or may not have existed. But actually, sometimes communities need to be told they don't need more officers on the ground, that actually crime is moving in a different direction. So I think that's a bigger conversation about what the police are for, absolutely has to be had at a very, very public level, and I think not to be left to chance. For the Guards, I think consistency is the key, as we've witnessed with PSNI. The constant reinvention of community policing, the constant shifting, as we've heard today, from the Guards of police officers, does not work. Okay, there needs to be a clear and a consistent approach to community policing. You don't really get too many chances to do this, and I think a lot of that starts with training as well, making sure that officers from the DNR that are in Templemore know exactly and are all on the same page. And I think internally as well, culturally changing this idea that community policing is, again, we've heard and again we've seen with PSNI, is not this peripheral activity, this sort of soft style of policing. And I think on that, I think you have a fantastic opportunity. Policing with the community in Northern Ireland was conceived in a period of change over 20 years where we've seen the police organisation being cut in half, essentially from 13,500 or so officers to 7,000. And I was jealous as I read the Commission report, which is talking about a very significant reinvestment in the numbers of officers in the ground. So I think that's a real opportunity to push policing onto the front line, something which I think, again, as we've heard today, is absolutely needed, to have those community policing officers. Because I think, it is important to have those, an increase. PSNI, for example, for many, many years have been hailed as a community-oriented policing service, but when only 10% of your organisation is comprised of neighbourhood community type officers, how strong is that claim? So I think increasing the proportion of neighbourhood officers is absolutely key. And how should that look? Well, what about the actual front line? How maybe should that look in a little bit more detail? And on the ground working with communities, I can't emphasise enough the need to work and create a system which works and does not sideline and works with the voluntary and community sector, the third sector, whatever you want to call it. Certainly, as we've heard from Marie, I think it's a question to ask society, both north and south. Where would you be if it was not for the work of, for example, Marie? How much more pressure would the Guards actually be under. And as chairperson of Community Restorative Justice Ireland, I can tell you there is an awful lot of unseen, unmeasured work which actually contributes to safer society, but which is not officially recognised within official police language. That is another thing which I think needs to change. Also, the acid test, as we like to call it, you can't invent or create a community policing system which doesn't work in the most difficult areas. It's that classic line, policing works best where it's needed least, okay? This commission cannot act as a glass floor for some people to look down and go, well, I'm glad things weren't as bad as the past. But at the same time, and particularly we've heard from across the panel, it can't also act as a glass ceiling from which some people look up and do not get that which they were promised. And I suppose the final thing, and again I think it's more fruitful to get conversations around this, I'll keep this to time, keeping a watching brief on practices which damage community relations, which damage the principles of doing this thing called district policing under the Commission. I'll give you the example, we've heard it already today, and we've heard it previously, stop and search. Even within one of the most overseen, accountable human rights compliance police systems in the world, in Northern Ireland, we still have very significant problems with stop and search. So I find it quite remarkable, and somebody who sat on policing accountability body, somebody who sits also on CAJ, human rights body, I find it quite unacceptable that you cannot go onto the Guard's website and you cannot get clear or comprehensive statistics on how much stop and search is being done. It's remarkable. That works against the democratic principles of doing policing on the ground. So the data management, as we've heard as well, that all needs, I think, to have significant, receive significant attention. So really what I'm saying today, and just as a summary comment to keep us within time, certainly we're in a seat of learning here today. I do not try to prescribe some sort of degree in hindsight, but certainly, looking back, looking at some of the parallels, I think because you're not coming from every word is unique, but you're not coming from a conflicted society, one which is riven with sectarian division and terrorist threat. I think you have an absolutely golden opportunity to get this thing called community policing right. All I would do is encourage you to take some of those long lessons, and hopefully you've got the chance to rebuild that vision of the Guards, which I think people, certainly in the communities where it's needed most, so longingly need and deserve. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Now we're going to run into our next panel, our closing session, but we are going to take some time for questions and comments now. And there's an awful lot there, so we might take a couple of questions or comments together if anyone would like to get us started. I see one hand here. Yeah, if you want to go ahead. Yeah. And the microphone, you might just wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to applaud Thematic O'Connell for this terrific day and line up such wonderful people. And in particular, I found this session incredibly interesting. And of that, Marie is possibly the star of the show, who should, in my opinion, be replicated right throughout the country. And I'm particularly familiar with the North Inner City, so I know that, Marie, it was never easy, even in the days when Tony Gregory was there trying to do his best. So I think he's proud of you. And my question to you is, I suppose, I'm disappointed in one way that the Minister and the Commissioner did not wait for this part of the proceedings, because I think it's so brilliant. But I wonder, were there situations when you were reaching out to your community, and really you're the only one who's accountable, completely accountable to the community that you work within, to keep the mothers safe, to keep their families safe, to the Gardaí, to the taxpayer, and to the government. And I wonder, were there times throughout your career in the 20 years when you found you were quite isolated, or you felt alone in that, or you felt you were unsafe? And if I could also mention Sindy, and to say that your part as well, it's the community activism that I find so interesting, and how you have gone on with your studies, and I'm heartened to see that. I think it's incredible, against all the odds, that you're here today, having succeeded where, so many have failed. And I hope and that there are many following in your footsteps. And I wonder, have you inspired many within your own community to come to university and to reach the heights that you're reaching? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll take 2 more points here before we go back to the panel. So just here in third row from the front, and yourself. Thank you.
First of all, thank you. It's been amazing. There's so much discussion and so much hope for change, and the work that was done in Dublin that you were discussing, actually, I've done a lot of work in Dublin myself, and I have to say, when you're from Galway and you go to Dublin and you suddenly realise I ain't in Kansas anymore, it is an interesting experience. And I have to say that my experience has always been that within the communities there is a great spirit, there is a great willingness to help, and people are extremely kind. And I think similarly with the work that Sindy's done in Galway, the Galway Traveller Movement have been fabulous in supporting people, and they continue to do excellent work. And the one thing I wanted to know, Sindy, is do you plan to follow up some of your research that you did in Galway and maybe do a wider study?
Thank you. Yeah, and then we've got one more comment or question just along the row there.
Hello, I was just talking to members of the community policing. I was at the meetings in Dublin, and at the meetings I was of the opinion that this was going to be another report just shelved and whatever and not properly put together, but I could highly compliment them on the report was put together. First of all, they addressed all the problems that were there within our policing service and came up with solutions. So if all these problems and all these solutions are implemented, we should have a police service to be very proud of. Now, you see there on the backdrop there, the Irish Centre for Human Rights. You could put that down as a neighbourhood, and this lady talked about a neighbourhood and had to police it herself. And another member there today talked about what is community policing. Community policing is, as we said, a human right. Policing the community, that every human being within that community has one human right to be able to live in that community. And this is what I think addressed in this future policing report, was these rights were all addressed and what needs to change and what needs to happen. And I would highly compliment it. It's a wonderful report, and I hope every part of it is implemented.
Thank you. So I think Marie and then Sindy, and then if anyone else wants to jump in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the compliment. I really appreciate that. Safety. I've always been asked that question, and I have to be very truthful. Until the feud kicked off in Dublin, I've always felt safe. And it's only when the feud kicked off, we went into a completely different community policing scenario. I mean, completely different. It's frightening. It still is. It's intimidating. I grew up in this community. I live in this community, so I actually know the gang of one side in this community, friends of mine. And just because I started to work with the police, I wouldn't leave my friends behind, whether they're on the road of criminality or they're on the road of education. We're all different, and we all choose our path. So the feud was brand new. It was nerve-wracking, eggshelling. The involvement, how much involved I got, that I had to get, was really nerve-wracking. I didn't handle it very well, I have to say. From the 20 years, I don't think I handled it as well as I should, or I could have. I wish I had those 3 years back now. I think I might be able to do it differently. And when things come at you on a day-to-day basis, you have to tread with your feet, because it's all so different. I never had a gun in my hand in my life, and then I was given a gun. I'm like, oh God, gun. And I had to pretend this was fine, that I get guns every day. But, and sit there and say, yeah, oh, thank you, and I really appreciate this. And then I rang the chief, and he says to me, what kind of a gun is it, Marie? And of course my response is, now how the hell would I know? How would I know? I don't know anything about guns. So I said, we have to rephrase that. Is it small or big? He says, yeah. So right, we go with a handgun. That's what it is. So every day, you never know what's going to walk in your door. And I have to tell you, my spirituality is so high, because I always, this is me. I say to the man above, please help me, that I say the right thing and I do the right thing, because I don't know what is and what's right, what's wrong. But the feud completely changed my whole community. And it's been devastating. It's still devastating. And it's a very intimidating situation. And it's been quiet now for a while. We haven't had any shots yet within my community. And you know what it's like for me when I wake up in the morning and I hear shooting happening? And the first thing I say is, please don't let it be my community. And we've had 14 deaths, one after the other. And these are people I knew and I know, I grew up with. And it's like, it is devastating. But that was the only time I felt, and there is a guard in the room that knocked on my door one day, because I knew there was something wrong, and I didn't know how I was handling things, so I left the job for a while. And he knocked at my door, the guard, which would be okay, because they're always knocking at my door. And he told me that they had concerns for me. And I felt normal when he said that, would you believe? I actually felt normal because I didn't know how to explain to people what I was going through and the confidentiality and the information I was receiving. I had to hold all that in there. So when he came in and said that to me, I felt, I'm okay, what I'm feeling is normal, I am feeling this. And then I panicked, of course, you know. And then the worst thing was to tell my family what happened, because then they panicked more, and they're usually very good at, you know, supporting. So I shouldn't have told them, I just should have kept myself. But anyway, we're getting through it. It's there. We deal with it. What comes at us, we deal with it. What comes at us tomorrow, we'll deal with it. And what else can you do? You just have to deal with it.
Thanks, Marie. Okay. Dr. Joyce, Sindy, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I suppose there are people that are proud of me and support me through my education, I suppose. But I suppose for your question that did it inspire other travellers to go to university? I suppose if you kind of look all over the country, there are a lot of travellers that are in universities all over the country. I suppose that it's just I was the first to actually get a PhD, and I suppose like we couldn't even hear in NUI Galway only was it yesterday or the day before this week it was, where there was a traveller kind of forum set up by travellers for travellers here in the university grounds, and which is fantastic, you know, one of the first of its kind in Ireland in any university. So I suppose in the next few years we will be seeing many more of Minkers going into universities and doing masters and hopefully PhDs, and there'll be many of us, I suppose, doctors that can, I suppose, try to make a change in society for the better. And I suppose the next question, I missed the second half of your question. You were talking about research.
I was just wondering, the research you did in Galway, are you planning to do that around the rest of the country? The research sounded so interesting. I was thinking, you know, I know there's a good strong community here in Galway. Well, the research wasn't with Galway Traveller Movement. It was actually my own research with the University of Limerick. Yeah. So when I was doing my PhD, I wasn't working with Galway Traveller Movement. I was actually working with Galway Traveller Movement before my PhD. And when I started my PhD, I moved down to Limerick to the University of Limerick to do my PhD. I suppose. With my research, the findings, and I suppose, particularly around the methodology I used, the methodology is a transferable methodology for any minority, and which can be used. You know, like my methodology, it was a really kind of unique and innovative methodology. It was because it was a qualitative ethnographic study. What I did is I did some focus groups first, and within the focus groups, what I did, because they were young people, I wanted to kind of get a discussion around it instead of just asking questions and me being the researcher. And you know, I suppose you know how young people can get then as well around, particularly I suppose when they come together and around something. So I suppose what I did is I got a map of Galway City, and I gave each of my participants both red and green stickers, and I asked them to place the red stickers on the areas of the map where they had experienced the most racism and discrimination, and then the green stickers to place them in the safer spaces. And what I realised after when I was analysing my findings, I suppose, was that there was actually no safe spaces in Galway for the young people. There were safer spaces, but actually no safe spaces, because even the spaces where they lived were being surveillance and governed by other people, where they couldn't live a normal everyday life without experiencing some sort of racism or discrimination, or their lives being disrupted in one way or another. And what I did then after the focus groups is I brought them around the city on walks to the areas where they had discussed on the maps, to observe myself the experiences that they were having within the city. So I suppose like that methodology can be transferable to other groups all over the country, not only for Minkers, but I suppose other ethnic and minority groups as well.
Thank you. And I know, Johnny, 30 seconds for the last word.
I will only need 30 seconds. Just to point out that the funding and the future of the community policing forum in the North Inner City is uncertain. And it was born out of a serious crisis in policing 20 years ago. And there's huge lessons that we've learned from it. So I think it would be an absolute tragedy. I think you'd all agree, have listened to Marie, if it didn't continue into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much indeed, and my remaining task is to hand over to Professor O'Connell to thank him for this amazing day, and to thank all of our speakers and respondents on your behalf for their amazing presentations. So, Muile Buíochas, thank you very much.